Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, December 18, 2024. The Federal Reserve cuts interest rates 0.25%, the third cut of the year, and suggests that the pace of rate cuts next year may slow down because inflation is still above their target 2%. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average falls 1,100 points. Coming up, we'll hear from Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who says the Fed is entering a new phase of rate cuts, and talk with MarketWatch reporter Greg Robb. House Speaker Mike Johnson is defending the bill to keep the U.S. government operating past Friday against Republican critics who say it spends too much and contains extraneous measures. And now, President-elect Donald Trump is coming out against the continuing resolution, the CR. Senate advances a bill dealing with Social Security, repealing provisions that limit the ability of some retirees who also collect pensions from claiming Social Security benefits. Senate also joins the House in passing a nearly $900 billion National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, sending it to President Biden. The bill has a provision that limits transgender care insurance coverage for children of service members. And the Senate takes up but does not pass a bill that would allow local enforcement to track drones, a response to the mysterious drone sightings in New Jersey and other states in the eastern U.S. CNN writes the Federal Reserve on Wednesday cut interest rates by 0.25 point, the third rate cut since it began to lower borrowing costs in September. The central bank's latest move, which wasn't unanimous, is an attempt to ease pressure on America's economy from elevated interest rates to preserve the labor market's health. The Fed also signaled in its policy statement that it is leaning toward holding rates steady in the future since inflation remains stubbornly above the central bank's 2% target. That was from CNN. Here's Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at his news conference in Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I did not hear you use the word recalibration today. And I'm just wondering if the recalibration phase is over and what you might call this new phase and whether the criteria for changing rates is somehow different and higher than it was before. Thanks.
We're not renaming the phase yet, but we may get around to that. But no, I would say we are, though, in a new phase in the process, as I said. So, and that's just because we've reduced our policy rate by 100 basis points. We're significantly closer to neutral. We still think where we are is meaningfully restrictive. And I think from this point forward, it's appropriate to move cautiously and look for progress on inflation. We've done a lot to support economic activity by cutting 100 basis points, and that's a good thing. I support the decision, and I think it was the right decision to make. I think from now, we are in a place where the risks really are in balance, and we need to see progress on inflation, and that's how we're thinking about it. So it is kind of a new thing. We moved pretty quickly to get to here, and I think going forward, obviously, we're going to be moving slower, which is consistent with the SEP.
Wonder if I could follow up and ask you how much you or the committee are looking through some of the high numbers we've had in the recent inflation numbers. For example, cars being up maybe because of the hurricanes, eggs because of the avian flu, that kind of stuff, and then looking forward perhaps to housing inflation coming down as it did in the recent report.
So we always try to be careful about not throwing out the numbers we don't like. It's just an occupational hazard is to look, those high months are wrong. What about the low months? We have a very low month potentially in November. It's estimated by many to be in the mid-teens for core PCE. So that could be idiosyncratically low. We try to look at not just a couple or 3 months. We shouldn't have our position shouldn't change based on 2 or 3 months of good or bad data. We have a long string now of inflation coming down gradually over time. As I mentioned, 12-month headlines 2.5, 12-month core is 2.8. That's way better than we were. We still have some work to do, though, is how we're looking at it, and we need policy to remain restrictive to get that work done, we think.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at today's news conference. MarketWatch senior reporter Greg Robb joins us now to talk about the Federal Reserve's latest interest rate cut and what the future may hold. Thanks, as always, for being with us. Chair Powell says they're entering a new phase. What does that mean?
It means that they're going to be cautious and that rate cuts are, not guaranteed. They're going to look at inflation and make sure that inflation is coming down before they cut. and they are also going to want to see what President Trump and his new economic team put in place or put forward when Trump takes office in mid-January.
Did the interest rate cuts in the first phase accomplish what the Fed wanted to?
It's kind of curious about what they've been up to lately. What they started in September with a really aggressive half-point cut, and it looked back then that was a signal that they were going to start moving really aggressively. But really soon after that cut, they had to kind of reverse course a little bit and be more cautious. They engineered 2 quarter-point cuts after that, one in November and one today. So it's a kind of a mixed message from them, but they have brought rates down 100 basis points since September. Powell was saying today he thinks that's a good place to be, and they can respond. If the economy weakens, they can cut rates and give the economy a boost. And rates, he thinks, are high enough that any kind of surge in inflation won't be kind of deadly for the economy.
Fed Chair Powell said that this latest interest rate cut was a closer call than the previous ones, and it wasn't unanimous. Anything to take away from that?
It was interesting. I mean, I think there was a lot of different voices on the Fed at this time. If you look at the numbers, we've had 4 kind of lousy inflation numbers. So it did raise this question about why they were cutting in December. A lot of people thought that. They thought that the Fed might kind of want to pause now, but they seem to want to kind of follow through a little bit on what they had said in September. In September, they said, we're going to cut for a couple of months and see how things go. So it seems like they followed through on that pledge. But on paper, it was sort of a question, and it was the many questions at the press conference were kind of like, what exactly are you doing here? Why are you cutting? And Powell didn't have the greatest answer, but, there we are. They cut by 100 basis points now.
We're talking with MarketWatch senior reporter Greg Robb. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on Wall Street fell, and they're on a 10-day losing streak, longest in 50 years. What's going on?
I mean, I think people have gotten jitters. The President-elect Trump's policies that he's been talking about on the campaign trail and recently, especially, this tariff wars with our closest trading partners, it kind of puts jitters into people's minds. They think that's going to have an impact on the economy, on inflation. Just, if you do a back of the envelope calculation, that's inflationary. So I think the markets are getting a little bit spooked by that. They had hoped that the Fed was going. I think the markets were hoping that the Fed could get rates down to like the 3% range. Now they're a little bit above 4%. So I think there's a little bit of disappointment. We'll see. I think tomorrow, and we'll have to see how things go in a couple of days from now, and whether this is a trend or not. But it looks like just there's disappointment here. The Fed is more hawkish than people like, especially the market.
And finally, did you hear any other question from today's press conference with Fed Chair Powell that caught your attention?
I mean, I think he was very upbeat on the economy. It was remarkable that he thought that, he was really kind of saying that the economy is doing really well. And it kind of begs the question of exactly why America decided to vote for President Trump over the Biden administration. I think there's a sort of a disconnect there. How is the economy doing? Well, I do think that ordinary Americans are not feeling great about the economy. So that was, I think, a really interesting part there. We didn't really get a chance to talk to Powell about it much, but I do think that there's sort of this sense of like the economy is doing really well, but for who?
Greg Robb, MarketWatch senior reporter. You can find his articles at marketwatch.com and on X at GRobb2000. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And on Wall Street, the Dow was down 1,123, NASDAQ down 716, S&P down 178. From thehill.com, their 12:30 report, lawmakers unveiled the long-anticipated text of the bipartisan deal to fund the government through March 14th. They ask what's in the 1,500-page continuing resolution, or CR, roughly $100 billion in disaster relief, a one-year extension of the Farm Bill, $10 billion in economic assistance for farmers, etc. And they write some specific line items: lawmakers' first pay raise since 2009, funding to rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, transfer of jurisdiction of RFK Memorial Stadium campus to the District of Columbia, which could lead to the Washington Commanders' return to Washington, an exemption to allow lawmakers to opt out of Obamacare, reforms for pharmaceutical benefit managers, PBMs, $2 billion for Small Business Administration funding for the disaster loan program. And also in this article, what's not included: President Biden's $24 billion request for funding to Ukraine. Some Republicans have been grumbling over all the add-ons, writes The Hill, that this started as a simple short-term extension to fund the government for a few more months, but has grown in magnitude. Well, House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, responded to the critics on Fox News Channel this morning.
When we start the new Congress in January, when Republicans are in control and DOJ is working on all 6 cylinders, we're going to be able to scale back the size and scope of government. But before we get to that point, remember, right now we only control 1/2 of the federal government. Remember, Democrats are still in charge of the Senate and the White House. So what we've done is the conservative play call here. My friends that you just interviewed there, or that those clips were played, were part of this decision. We decided, even though we don't normally like short-term stopgap funding measures, it made sense here. Instead of doing, Chuck Schumer and Biden spending for 2025, we pushed this decision into March. It'll be March 14th. So the feature there is that we'll have Republican-controlled Congress and Trump back in the White House, and we get to decide spending for 2025. So that was a good thing. Yeah.
But, Mr. Speaker, I think the confusing part is because typically when there's objection to bills like that, you hear the Freedom Caucus, which you heard Chip Roy. But you even have moderate members who are in big races. You got Mike Lawler, who is not, an extreme, fiscal conservative, but he's saying the same thing. So how did you lose the Freedom Caucus and the moderate members?
This is the sausage-making process, okay? Here's what this bill entails. It's a short-term funding extension until March 14, and that would have been an easy thing relatively to pass. But here's what happened. We also had to add, and due to circumstances outside of any of our control, emergency funding. We have 2 major emergencies. We had a record historic hurricane season that we all know, Helene and Milton and the rest, that destroyed a big swath of the country. We have to have funding for that. That's $100 billion to rebuild 6 states. And then on top of that, we have our farmers, our small farmers and ranchers, our food producers in this country are in jeopardy of going under permanently. They've had 3 lost years in a row, primarily because of Bidenomics and inflation and lots of other factors outside their control. So for the first time since I've been in Congress, guys, in 8 years, it's not just farmers and ranchers urgently needing the help. We now have the creditors, the lenders, the banks who give them those loans, who are saying we have to have a stopgap measure.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, this morning on Fox News Channel. Current federal government funding runs through 12:01 a.m. Eastern on Saturday. An extension would need to be passed by the House and Senate and signed into law by the President before then to prevent a government shutdown. Congressman Tom McClintock, Republican of California, an opponent of the current proposal, spoke to C-SPAN this morning.
A short-term spending package on the table. What do you think of it?
I don't like it for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that there's no serious work on a long-term budget. I would support a strict CR if we were engaged in the budget process, if we were in negotiations and needed a few more days or even a few more weeks. But we haven't been engaged in a serious budget process now in years. And so we continue to go CR by CR down a fiscal road to ruin.
When you say strict CR, just the issues at hand, or some of the other things that were added to this CR, like in...
Well, that's the other thing, is they've added so much to it. Yesterday, Mike Johnson reported it was 1,400 pages. I understand it's now been reported out at 1,500 pages. So 100 pages magically appeared in the last 24 hours. And I'm looking at some of these numbers, and they're eye-popping. $100 billion for disaster relief. Well, no one begrudges disaster relief, but $100 billion, that's $800 taken from every family in America. To me, that sounds a little excessive, and I'd want to go through that with a fine-tooth comb.
Congressman Tom McClintock, Republican from California, on C-SPAN's Washington Journal this morning. Also joining C-SPAN this morning, Congressman Sean Casten, Democrat.
We got 1,500 pages released last night at, I think it was about 7 o'clock at night. This is no way to run a country. And we're all sort of furiously going through to figure this out right now. None of us, certainly on the Democratic side of the aisle, want to shut down the government. But there's this has been such a strange Congress, and I think it's important for your viewers to understand how unusual this is. We're talking about a CR, a continuing resolution. This is a normal function of Congress, that when you've worked and you've figured out all the funding for the State Department, the Defense Department, the Education Department, the Energy Department, and maybe there's a few little I's and T's you need to cross, and we're about to run out of money, you pass a continuing resolution, typically for a month or two, that says, let's just keep government running at current levels until we iron out those details. That's normal. The Republican House this term has yet to pass a funding bill in 2 years. So we are basically agreeing on a continuing resolution that is consistent with the funding levels set when the Democrats last controlled the House. Now, as a Democrat, those were my own funding priorities, and so I suppose in some small way that's a win. But the world was very different 2 years ago, right? We were coming out of COVID. We had high inflation. We had the situation in Ukraine. It was before the situation in Gaza. We should be funding the government today to the needs of today, not running based on where it was 2 years ago. And so instead, because the Republican Party has been at war with itself, they haven't been able to bring bills to the floor. So they're funding this CR. There's a whole lot of other things in it that are not related to the CR that they're trying to get done at the end of the year. But one of the primary powers of Congress is the power of the purse to set funding levels. And to go 2 years without this Republican leadership bringing bills to the floor to do that is, I think it's disrespectful of this institution and disrespectful to the American people.
Congressman Sean Casten, Democrat from Illinois, on C-SPAN's Washington Journal this morning. Congressman Jared Golden, Democrat from Maine, saying he'll be voting no on the government funding extension, writing on X, "We should be working to raise Americans' wages and lower their health care costs, not slipping new taxpayer-funded perks for ourselves into must-pass legislation behind closed doors. As long as raises and new health care perks for members are in the CR, I will vote against it." Vice President-elect J.D. Vance putting out a statement that reads, a statement from President Donald J. Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. It runs several paragraphs. The last few are, Republicans want to support our farmers, pay for disaster relief, and set our country up for success in 2025. The only way to do that is with a temporary funding bill without Democrat giveaways combined with an increase in the debt ceiling. Anything else is a betrayal of our country. Republicans must get smart and tough. If Democrats threaten to shut down the government unless we give them everything they want, then call their bluff. It is Schumer and Biden who are holding up aid to our farmers and disaster relief. And Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat from New York, the minority leader, with this post on X, House Republicans have been ordered to shut down the government and hurt the working class Americans they claim to support. You break the bipartisan agreement, you own the consequences that follow. Again, current federal government funding runs out Friday. The U.S. Senate today voted to advance a bill on Social Security. It would repeal provisions that limit the ability of some retirees who also collect pensions from claiming Social Security benefits. The vote was 73 to 27, more than the 60 votes needed to advance the bill in the Senate. ABC News reports that among those impacted are retirees who at one time worked as firefighters, teachers, postal workers, police officers, or in other public sector jobs. Provision that limits the benefits allotted to those workers' surviving spouses would also be eliminated. Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat of Ohio, spoke in favor of the bill before the vote.
Social Security, we know, is a bulwark, bedrock of our middle class. It's retirement security that Americans pay into and earn over a lifetime. You pay in for 40 quarters. You pay in for essentially 10 years. You've earned it. It should be there when you retire. These restrictions right now, though, prevent some 3 million Americans, nearly 250,000 people in my state alone, many of whom are law enforcement, first responders, teachers, school bus drivers, school cafeteria workers, public servants. It means that many will not get their full Social Security benefit. It makes no sense. These workers serve the public, they protect our communities, they teach our kids, they pay into Social Security just like everyone else. I think about when we did a hearing a few months ago at a fire station in Columbus. I met Barbara Ward. She drives a special needs bus for Fairland local schools in I believe in Gallia County on the Ohio River. She drives 200 miles a day. She's done this for 40 years. She's in her 70s. Her mom was the first female bus driver hired in that district. Her husband served our country in the Navy Seabees, building our naval bases and paying into Social Security with every paycheck. After he passed away 10 years ago, Barb started receiving his Social Security survivor's benefits until Barb retired with her school pension when her Social Security benefit dropped from $2,100 a month to $500 a month. Again, he earned this. This wasn't charity. This isn't a giveaway. He earned that Social Security benefit, and she should have it.
Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, today on the Senate floor. CNBC has an article on this bill and the two Social Security rules that are being repealed. The windfall elimination provision reduces Social Security benefit payments for individuals who also receive income from non-covered pensions, payments from employers who did not withhold Social Security taxes from their salaries. Government pension offset adjusts Social Security spousal or widower benefits for people who receive income from non-covered pensions. The WEP was enacted in 1983 to make it so workers with non-covered pensions were not reimbursed as though they were long-time low-wage earners. Social Security has a progressive benefit formula, which means low earners receive a higher income replacement rate. And the government pension offset was established in 1977 and reduces Social Security benefits for spouses and surviving spouses who receive a pension based on their own government work that wasn't subject to Social Security payroll taxes, and Social Security spousal benefits based on their spouse's work record. That was from CNBC. Senator Thom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, opposed this bill based on the cost, he says, and also the need for more comprehensive Social Security program funding and benefit reforms.
Now, I don't know how many people are going to oppose the bill today. It is likely to move through. But to those of you who are looking past the regular order and fixing the things that I know are not fixed in this bill, own it when we have to come back and fix it. I will come back and fix it. I will help with Social Security reform, but know that you're making the job harder to fix a trust fund that is within 10 years of going insolvent. It would be easy for me to talk to my friends at the Fraternal Order of Police and say, yeah, we're going to get this done. And by God, I hope somebody over the next 8 to 10 years fixes Social Security in the future, because in 10 years, there will be a mandatory 17 minimum, 17% cut in the Social Security benefit across the board if we continue to fail to act here and if we continue to dig a deeper hole by the vote that we're having today. So to those of you who need this fix, who need to be treated fairly, count me in. But understand the folks that are rushing this vote today are hastening today where they're probably going to break the promise for 97% more people on Social Security who do not benefit from this bill. Look, I'm in an election cycle. A lot of people may think that I am committing political suicide by doing this, but this chamber needs courage and needs to say what needs to be said. We are about to pass an unfunded $200 billion spending package for a trust fund that is likely to go insolvent over the next 9 to 10 years, and we're going to pretend like somebody else has to fix it. Well, when you're a U.S. Senator and you got the election certificate, that falls on us.
Senator Thom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, on the Senate floor. The procedural vote today was successful. 73 yeses, 27 noes, more than 60 votes needed to advance the bill. Again, from the CNBC article, the WEP rule affected 2.01 million individuals, or 3.1% of all Social Security beneficiaries as of 2022, according to the Social Security Administration. The GPO rule applied to almost 735,000 beneficiaries as of 2022, according to SSA. That affects about 1% of all beneficiaries. From the Washington Times, an effort to push through new authority to detect and interdict drones was blocked in the Senate Wednesday after Senator Rand Paul said it's too soon to rush a solution that could end up trampling on Americans' rights. Top Democrats had pushed the bill as a snap response to the drone sightings in New Jersey in recent weeks. They said the federal government has the authority and capability to act but doesn't have the capacity to be everywhere. State and local governments are everywhere but lack the authority. That was from the Washington Times. Senator Gary Peters is a Democrat from Michigan and chairs the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. He asked unanimous consent to pass the bill.
My legislation, which passed out of the committee that I chair, Homeland Security and Government Affairs, passed unanimously last Congress, out of committee, would equip law enforcement agencies, including state and local police, like the officials currently dealing with the ongoing situation in New Jersey, with the tools to better detect and to track drones and identify cases where they may pose a security threat to large public gatherings, airports, critical infrastructure facilities, as well as our communities. Most urgently, this bill would ensure that law enforcement has the technology needed to quickly and clearly identify exactly what the reported sightings of drones across the country actually are. If a drone is found to be a potential danger, our law enforcement agencies, they must have the tools to mitigate these threats effectively. And that's why my bill would allow the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice to operate a pilot program so that state and local law enforcement agencies can conduct drone mitigation activities to safely disable threatening drones before they cause serious harm.
Senator Gary Peters, Democrat from Michigan, as he said, chair of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee on the Senate floor, asking unanimous consent to pass this bill. Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, currently committee ranking member and set to become chair in the next Congress, objected to the passage.
No one disputes that drones flying in airspace could be a danger. The drones flying over the Super Bowl could be a danger. The drones flying over our military bases could be a danger. That's why it's illegal. It's currently illegal, and the federal government has the capacity to investigate and stop drones that are in airspace, over our military bases, following our ships. We have that capacity. But what is disputed, and what the Biden administration is currently telling us, is they don't see a problem. So if there is a problem, let the Biden administration be forthcoming, let us know the extent of the problem, let us know who's flying the drones, and let us know what's going on. Instead, this bill says, well, we don't know, the Biden administration doesn't know, but why don't we give the power to the local officials to go after drones? But I rise today to object to this unanimous consent request because at the time, public trust in government is in historic lows. This body must not rush to grant sweeping surveillance powers without proper consideration and debate by the committees of jurisdiction, which is what I pledged to do beginning in January when we will be in charge of the committees.
Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor, objecting to the unanimous consent request from Senator Gary Peters to pass this bill. From TheHill.com, the FBI has received tips of more than 5,000 reported drone sightings in recent weeks, and the federal government is supporting state and local officials in investigating some of the reports. Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the FAA, and the Department of Defense issued a statement this week describing the sightings to date as a combination of lawful commercial drones, hobbyist drones, and law enforcement drones, as well as manned fixed-wing aircraft, helicopters, and stars mistakenly reported as drones. That was from The Hill. Washington Today continues in a moment.
As the year ends, we need your help to keep democracy accessible to everyone. 100% of your tax-deductible gift supports C-SPAN's work, giving you unfiltered access to your government. For decades, C-SPAN has brought you straightforward, unbiased coverage, free from ads and partisan spin. But we can't do it without you. Visit cspan.org/donate to make your gift today. Give now to protect democracy unfiltered in 2025 and beyond. Thank you for your support. And don't forget, visit cspan.org/donate to help keep this mission going.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also available on YouTube. Just search for Washington Today. A few other headlines. C-SPAN's Capitol Hill producer Craig Kaplan writes on X, legislation to prevent abuse in youth treatment centers now heads to President Biden to be signed into law following the 373-33 vote House passage. Senate approved the bill by voice vote last week. Paris Hilton advocated for the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act at a June House hearing. And from Associated Press, the House Ethics Committee voted in secret to release the long-awaited ethics report into ex-Congressman Matt Gaetz, raising the possibility that the allegations against the Florida Republican, who was President-elect Donald Trump's first choice for Attorney General, could be made public in the coming days. It's a stunning turnaround for the often secretive panel of 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. Just last month, members voted along party lines to not release the findings of their nearly 4-year investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct with minors and use of illicit drugs while Gaetz was in office. That was from AP. And also from AP, the Supreme Court on Wednesday said it will hear arguments next month over the constitutionality of the federal law that could ban TikTok in the United States if its Chinese parent company doesn't sell it. The Senate approved the mammoth $895 billion National Defense Authorization Act on Wednesday, writes CBS News, despite concern from some Democrats over a controversial policy restricting gender-affirming care for children of service members. In an 85-14 vote, the Senate approved legislation, which the House passed last week. 11 Democrats and 3 Republicans voted against it in the upper chamber. The bill now heads to President Biden's desk for his signature. That story from CBS News. Senator Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island, the Armed Services Committee chair, spoke on the Senate floor before the vote.
This is a strong, forward-looking bill that we can all be proud of. This NDAA is laser-focused on the threats we face. First and foremost, it recognizes the urgent challenge that China poses to our national security. Beijing continues to escalate its aggressive behavior, both militarily and economically, against the U.S. and our allies, and we must respond with resolve. This NDAA makes strong progress in that regard. Among many other efforts, it authorizes $15.5 billion for the Pacific Defense Initiative. It establishes a joint force headquarters in Japan, and it strengthens a number of our regional networks, including AUKUS, the Quad, our trilateral partnership with South Korea and Japan, our alliance with the Philippines, and our partnership with Taiwan. These are momentous accomplishments. The NDAA also addresses the evolving threats from Russia, Iran, North Korea, and transnational criminal organizations. It authorizes full funding for the European Defense Initiative, provides support for our security cooperation missions with Israel, and improves our counter-drug capabilities in the Western Hemisphere. Importantly, the bill authorizes record-level investments in key technologies like hypersonics and artificial intelligence, and significantly increases resources for uncrewed systems and counter-UAS development. Indeed, our drone capabilities, both defensive and offensive, must be improved quickly, as we are seeing every day. The bill also makes substantial progress towards modernizing our ships, submarines, aircraft, and combat vehicles. Most importantly, this NDAA provides an historic level of support for our troops and their families. We have included the largest pay raise for junior enlisted service members in decades, expanded eligibility for the Basic Needs Allowance, and authorized increased funding to repair barracks around the world.
Senator Jack Reed, a Democrat from Rhode Island, Armed Services Committee chair on the House floor. Senator Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, the committee's ranking member, also supporting this bill.
We are currently experiencing the most dangerous national security moment since World War II. One need only scroll through the headlines summarizing this year's world events. Congress needed to respond in kind. At every possible opportunity, we should be sending a signal of peace through strength of strong deterrence. Accordingly, the Senate Armed Services Committee took an honest look at growing capability and aggression by our adversaries. We decided that this year was the time to change our course and move our military toward the generational defense investment it deserves. That vital committee action included an upgrade of $25 billion for our missile defense, shipbuilding, and counter-drone technology, among other modernization programs. $25 billion. This should have been part of the bill today. Regrettably, we missed an opportunity to strengthen the president-elect's hand as he takes office in a precarious world situation. I hope and expect we will see bipartisan support for much-needed investment early in 2025. And yet, as I note what's missing from the bill, I'm happy to recognize the immense accomplishments that members have included in NDAA. We secured a significant 14.5% pay raise for our junior enlisted service members, as well as a 4.5% increase for all other service members. We made investments in junior ROTC and recruitment capabilities, both of which will help solve the military's manpower crisis. This bill stops the Department of Defense from paying for puberty blockers and hormone therapies for children. We blocked the teaching of critical race theory in military programming. And we froze diversity, equity, and inclusion hiring at the DoD. In fact, we defunded DEI.
Senator Roger Wicker, Republican from Mississippi, Armed Services Committee ranking member on the Senate floor before the Senate passed the defense authorization bill. Vote was 85-14. The senators voting no included Democrats Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin, Cory Booker of New Jersey, Andy Kim of New Jersey, Ed Markey of Massachusetts, Jeff Merkley of Oregon, Adam Schiff of California, Debbie Stabenow of Michigan, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, Peter Welch of Vermont, Ron Wyden of Oregon, Independent Bernie Sanders of Vermont, and Republicans Mike Braun of Indiana, Mike Lee of Utah, and Rand Paul of Kentucky. The House already passed this bill, so it will be signed into law by President Biden. This is the 64th consecutive year that Congress has approved the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. This year, the Senate did not consider amendments to the bill on the floor, and some senators voiced objections to that. Senator Baldwin wanted to offer an amendment to remove the ban on transgender care for minors. Senator Paul sought an amendment dealing with the power of Congress and the president in foreign policy. From Reuters, the brother of an Israeli man held hostage in the Gaza Strip by Palestinian militants Hamas criticized the United Nations Security Council on Wednesday for inaction and urged it to send a resonating message that terror will never prevail. Michael Levy's brother Or was taken hostage, and Or's wife was killed when Hamas attacked Israel. On October 7, 2023, Levy was the first person from a hostage family to brief the 15-member Security Council, which has met dozens of times on the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza over the past 14 months. That was from Reuters. Here's part of the address to the council.
Or is more than just a number. He is a real human being. A father to an amazing 3-year-old son named Almog, who lost his mother in the horrendous terror attack of October 7, and is now essentially orphaned. This baby had to celebrate his 3rd birthday without his parents. Try to imagine your own child celebrating his birthday without you, going through life's milestones without you. Imagine not knowing if your child is okay and who is taking care of him. Almog keeps asking about mom and dad, and even when we try to explain, he doesn't understand why he can't see his dad, and what it means when we say that mom will never come back. This baby still has a father who can come back to him. Do not let him become an orphan. You have the power to save his father. For 439 days, I've woken up every morning with a pit in my stomach, wondering where my brother is, wondering if he's cold, if he's hungry, if he managed to survive another day. Every moment he remains in captivity is a moment of unbearable suffering for him and for all of us who love him.
Michael Levy speaking remotely to the United Nations Security Council meeting in New York on the Middle East, including the Palestinian situation. That is the official title of their meeting. He is the first invited relative of a hostage in Gaza to address the Security Council. Story from the Jerusalem Post: the hostage deal between Israel and Hamas is not imminent. Diplomats familiar with the negotiations told the Jerusalem Post on Wednesday evening. Diplomats added that there are still several hurdles ahead of an agreement and warned caution in regard to recent optimistic reports regarding a breakthrough in negotiations. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken talked about this situation at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City.
You and Jake Sullivan and Bill Burns have been indefatigable, running across the region, trying to reach a ceasefire and a resolution and a release of the hostages. There's been recent reports, there's been a little bit of progress, perhaps, on the Hamas side in terms of making some compromises. You've got 31, 32 days left. What percentage do you put on the prospects of reaching an agreement? Where are you spending Christmas and New Year's?
So one of the things that we know is that for those of us old enough to have grown up with Charlie Brown, there's the Lucy in the football moment, when Lucy puts the football down and Charlie Brown comes up to kick it and Lucy pulls the football away. So I don't want to hazard a guess on this because, we've had a few of those. But here's why I think and hope this is a really meaningful moment in finally getting this across the finish line. What's been the main impediment? The main impediment has fundamentally been Hamas, and Hamas at various moments believing that it could get the wider war that it's wanted from day one, that it could get Hezbollah in, that it could get Iran in, that it could get other Iranian-backed proxies in. Now it knows that the cavalry's not coming to the rescue, and it can't depend on, can't even really think about that wider war, precisely because of what we just talked about. Hezbollah can't and won't do it. Iran can't and won't do it. That, I think, is concentrated minds among Hamas leadership about needing to bring this to a conclusion. But you're also dealing with an organization where decision-making is very challenged, very difficult. Just that piece alone is hard, and the communications piece isn't easy. So you're also dependent on a small number of individuals who may not have the same pragmatic framework that we would bring to this. So all of that said, look, I'm hopeful. You have to be. We're going to use every minute of every day, of every week that we have left to try to get this done. But I don't want to hazard a guess as to how what the probability is. It should happen. It needs to happen. We need to get people home. We need to get the ceasefire. We need to get people moving in a different direction toward better lives, toward repairing the terrible damage that's been done. And I think the entire world wants to see that happen. We also can't have Hamas not only holding hostage the individuals that it took on October 7th, but literally holding the Palestinian people in Gaza hostage to its view of the future.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City today. A conversation with Michael Froman, the council president and former U.S. trade representative in the Obama administration. It's a story at the Washington Post. The United Nations Special Envoy to Syria on Wednesday gave one of his first signs of optimism about Syria's new government as the de facto leaders. The Islamic rebel group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham worked to attain international legitimacy and restore a sense of security to Syrians. And finally, on C-SPAN Radio, the 2025 presidential inauguration is 33 days away, writes WJLA-TV in Washington, but planning for this major event started months ago, well before the election. And today, the Joint Task Force National Capital Region will be rehearsing a concept drill demonstrating the military support for Donald Trump's second inauguration. Ahead of the inauguration, there's the counting and certification of electoral votes, which for the first time has been designated a national special security event. This means there will be more resources from the federal government as well as state and local partners. That was from WJLA. Today's drill was held at Joint Base Meyer Henderson Hall in Arlington, Virginia. Major General Trevor Bredenkamp is commanding general, Joint Task Force National Capital Region.
When I look at this, I kind of think Macy's Day Parade for Thanksgiving, right? You think about how big that is. So we touched on the Pentagon parking lot and Joint Base Anacostia Bowling. There are literally 12,000 people who will be participating in this parade. About 5,000 are military, and the rest are civilian organizations from around the country, right? And so all those people have to stage somewhere, and then they have to be cleared, by the Secret Service, by the lead federal agency for security, and then they have to be moved into their staging areas. And so it's a really huge undertaking, as we talked about the North parking lot in the Pentagon and Joint Base Anacostia Bowling. That is a very heavy logistical lift, supported, again, we provide that support to the U.S. Secret Service as the lead federal agency. But then the logistics of transporting all those people from those clearing areas into their marshaling areas to get staged for the inaugural parade. So it's a pretty big lift. So what's my role? So I am as the Commanding General of the Joint Task Force National Capital Region, I am the individual who's responsible for coordinating all the Department of Defense ceremonial support for the inauguration. And I do that with the assistance not only of my senior enlisted leader, Sergeant Major Vern Daly, but also with the addition of a Deputy Commanding General for Inauguration, Brigadier General Don Beavis, beside me, and I will let him go into greater detail on his roles and responsibilities. But yeah, so I'm responsible to liaise not only with the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, but also the Presidential Inaugural Committee. General Beavis executes most of that on a daily basis. And then I also keep the NORTHCOM commander and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff informed as we prepare to provide support for all the DoD's ceremonial support for the inauguration.
Army Major General Trevor Bredenkamp, Commanding General, Joint Task Force National Capital Region, in today's planning session for the military support for President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration on January 20th. You can find the video of the event in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. That's where you can also find this program as a podcast. Podcast also available on our free mobile app. And it's on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.